were stuck in a situation you just couldn't get out of it. Whether it's trying to study, trying to figure out your life path in the future, just didn't know how to get out of it. Okay, everybody. You raise your hand in line. I want to talk about something I've never talked about before. I do these keynotes a lot, so you're in for a treat. Put you here something about habits and socialization. I want to reframe this entire conversation I'm about to have with you about habits and socialization. So, when everyone's born, it's a clean slate. The world is a sandbox. You have no habits, and you haven't been socialized yet. But when you enter this new world, you're inundated with all this stimulus, right? And you start developing habits based on the families you grow up in, your parents, and then you develop the socialization. What society, the society that you're born into, how it socializes you, in how it identifies you. It pretty much dictates, whether it's not just your family, but also your society, what you're supposed to act as a woman, as a black woman, as trans, as cisgender, as a man. And as a baby, growing up, you don't have much of a choice. You don't have a lot of free will to determine what habits you want to take on and what you want to be socialized in. So for me, I was born into a strict family household of two tiger parents. And most Asian Americans, they have one good cop and backup, and it's usually doctor, lawyer, engineer, right? That's the stereotype. I didn't have much of a choice. It was just doctor. It was pretty bad. And I had two tiger parents who just pretty much put me on the path and developed a habit for me where I had to be stuck. And I had to be stuck in this one path to become a doctor. And no saying, that's all I knew. And over time, I became socialized as an Asian American by society to never speak up for myself, to always do the work and never complain, to be shy, to be not too super socially awkward. That was all I knew. And I just accepted it because having a habit of being unattractive, not fighting for myself, not thinking for myself, plus socialization by society beyond my parents, as an Asian American, I need to act a certain way. I'm stuck. And that's all I knew, right? And I thought that was the way it was. Now, though we all develop habits all the time, and then when you develop habits and you become a student, you don't really recognize that you're doing these things. That your habits become you. And when you get stuck, you stay stuck because you don't know how to get out of it because it's all you know, whether you socialize. And when it comes to being in a minority, when you encounter racism, a lot of us freeze and don't say anything because society has socialized you as a minority, not to speak of, whether it's a woman, trans, or a person of color. So, that being said, how do we get out of that? How do we get out of being stuck? And I knew that when I grew up all the way to high school, I wasn't happy. I didn't have much friends. I didn't have any friends. I didn't have much of a social life because that was what my habit was. My parents said that was the way it was supposed to be. I was not supposed to have a play date until I was in college, or I wasn't supposed to have a girlfriend until I had a job or in grad school. And that's when I just accepted it. So I just knew that was not right. I wasn't happy. And how did I get out of that habit? Well, the thing about breaking habits is, unfortunately, it requires crises. Shit has to hit the fan for you to say, wait a minute, this is really wrong, and you have to get one step away from total, utter crisis and failure for you to start breaking a habit. And unfortunately, in high school, I didn't know that. And when you go to counter crisis, you're more likely not prepared than prepared, and that's when you start developing your own personality. So, in high school, I was not happy, and I joined a bunch of this Asian appreciation club, because that's what happened. You know, I wanted with people that looked like me. And an Asian appreciation club, all they did was have dinners and touch each other and argue, oh, you're Asian too. And I wasn't happy there. Then what happened was there was a movie that came out called Better Luck Tomorrow. My brother sent me this movie as a trailer. He said, you have to check this movie. And I looked at the trailer and I realized there are Asian Americans. It's the first movie ever distributed by a major production studio that features Asian Americans in non-stereotypical roles. And for me, that was a big eye-opener for me because I was able to see Asian Americans that spoke perfect English. They weren't delivery boys. They weren't martial artists. And I really wanted to promote this movie and have my friends see it. And that for me was uncomfortable because I wasn't very social, I wasn't very outspoken. But I knew something in me wanted to change that. So I put myself in an uncomfortable situation. I forced myself in a situation where I had no choice. Where I showed my club this movie, and this movie trailer. I said, we have to watch this as a group. And they're like, okay, you're leading it. It's like, that's fine. It's easy to run a movie trip. You know, just a bunch of friends together, buy some tickets and have everyone get together and watch a movie. But I decided to go a step further, try to break a habit, because I was so upset, I was so unhappy with the path I was set on. But I didn't know how to fix it. I willingly just stepped out of my boundary comfort zone and said, why don't everyone for the next week go to your respective friends at other schools and try to get them to come watch the movie. Something simple. Just start small. And then they came back the next week, the meeting, and this is in high school, and they said, well, we all got our respective friends to look at the trailer, and we have a list of all the people who want to come. And everyone brought a list of like 10, 20, 30 people, right? And I had a list of 400 people who wanted to watch this movie. And all of a sudden, they looked to me as someone who was going to arrange this movie outing for 400 people. And when then most people would be like, you know what, habit-wise, that's too much. That's out of my, I'm way over my head. But I was like, you know what, I'm just keep going on this. Let me just step further and further into the unknown. So I went up to a movie theater that was going to show the movie, the AMC Empire 25 in Times Square. And I requested this, I demanded to see the manager. I'm 15 years old. And the manager came over and I gave him this list, this like handwritten list of 300 people, 400 people that wanted to watch the movie. And I was like, I want the biggest movie theater because we're going to have a party. And the manager was like, well, I'm pretty impressed. I'll give you the biggest movie theater. It'll fit about 700, 800 people. And you have the guarantee to sell it out when the movie opens in 2 weeks. And if you don't sell it out, right, we'll ban you from AMC Empire forever. We'll charge you the amount that you owe us. And I'm 15. And I said, sure, I'll do it. I don't know, he thought I was in college because I guess my growth spurt had already happened. So he took me for my word. This 15-year-old kid promised that I would get 400 more people in 2 weeks. Where was I going to find these 400 people? So yeah, I mean, this is a shy little kid who's 15 years old, who never really stepped out and who did something like this before, never took a leadership position, all of a sudden tasked with this impossible, daunting requirement before I become banned. I love movies, being banned from the largest movie chain in New York City area. So I posted on my blogs, I posted on social media. At the time, social media time was Zanga and LiveJournal. I put on news groups, message boards. I had people fill out money. I didn't have a credit card because I was 15, so name checks in my mom's name. I would meet college groups to get their payments in Starbucks. They would ask me what college I went to. I'd be like, oh, you never heard of it. Then what happened was the producer and the director of I Love Tomorrow actually noticed one of my messages and said, we're actually doing a red carpet screening, but instead of stepping on your toes, how about we just combine? Since you're already doing half the work. At the same movie theater that we planned to have an event anyway. And I said, sure. So they said, we'll send the cast and crew, the director, the cast will come. And I used that and I just printed the email and I just sent it to everyone. And on April 11, 2003, as I walked into the subway station, I saw literally 800 people in front of the movie theater waiting for me to tell them what to do. And I was like, what do I do? And in that moment of crisis, my habit changed. How did I become the shy, awkward little kid to this somehow person put in a leadership position to run a movie screening for these Hollywood big executives and cast and crew in a crowd of 800 people that were all of whom were older than I was. And that day, I got to meet the director and the producer. And the director, Justin Lin, he said because of that screening, he got a job in Hollywood. And he's now the director of Fast and Furious 3, 4, 5, Star Trek. Sung Kang, the hot guy from Fast and Furious 3, now is on all the Fast and Furious movies. That movie made it big for a lot of Asian Americans. And they asked me, how old are you? We were trying to guess how old you were the whole time. You don't seem like you're in college because you seem really young. And I still get that now. And I said, I'm 15 years old, I'm 16 years old, I'm about to turn 16. And they're like, whoa, like, have you always been involved in Asian American activism? Like, have you always been outspoken? Like, where did you, like, start? And like, to be honest, I just wanted to watch a movie. I never really cared about activism. I never really cared about stepping out of my comfort zone. And they're like, oh, that's crazy. Like, welcome to the movie. You're about to enter a world that's, like, way bigger than you realize. I didn't know what that meant. But I knew that as a person of color, I was habitually taught and socialized by society as a minority to not do these things. And if I were to do these things, it was something that shouldn't be part of my DNA. Because I tried to carry this behavior forward through college. And when I took on leadership roles, I became more confident trying to break my habits, trying to unlearn everything that my parents ever taught me about being a doctor and studying all the time. Guess who gave me the most amount of crap? Yes. Oh, parents, yes. Guess who showed up at the screening? My dad snuck in and followed me to the screening and screamed at me, and I was grounded. And he screamed at the director, "How dare you make a movie about Asian Americans?" It's about Asian Americans using their stereotype as a cover to commit crimes. It's based on a true story. And he said, "How dare you make a movie? Why can't you make a movie about Asian Americans being scientists and saving the world?" It was really funny because the next week they did a screening in Boston. My brother, who's 14 years older, he's a civil rights activist in from the 60s, from the 80s, from Berkeley. So he's completely different. He was at the screening and they were talking about this old elderly Asian guy yelling at them at the screening. Is that dad? It was dad. So yeah, parents, they give you the most scholarship, but also fellow Asian Americans, right? Why did fellow Asian Americans give me the most amount of shit in college for being outspoken? Because I ended up being vice president of my class in student council, as well as being president of Asian American Alliance, the ASA equivalent here. And it's juggle both hats. Like, to me, that was great. Everyone was like, he's a bridge builder or a game changer. But the people who gave me the most amount of crap were fellow Asian Americans, because we've all been habitually socialized to not believe that we should take leadership positions. Asian Americans have the highest percentage of higher education, MBAs, MDs, PhDs, with the lowest percentage of executive level positions. So seeing a fellow Asian American go out there, put themselves out there, rattled a lot of people. So even when we try to do our best to represent our communities, we get shit for it, right? And that's something that is inherent in every activist group, whether it's a person of color, whether it's a woman, as a feminist, as trans, as whatever, as disabled. You will have infighting among groups of people because we've all been habitually socialized to believe that we shouldn't fight for ourselves, that we shouldn't speak up for ourselves, that the status quo exists because that's the one in power. But it's so subconscious because everyone will say, yeah, we need to fight for ourselves. But when we see someone else actually doing it, the biggest critics are people within our own communities. And that's something that I encountered throughout college. And I try to get people to get more involved and take on leadership positions within my community, but it's extremely difficult because we've all habits, right? We are our habits, and there are good habits and there are bad habits, right? Bad habits are the ones I'm talking about, things that we had no control over, and as we grow up throughout our lives, we pick up these bad habits, whether it's from society, from our parents who tell us as people of color, like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. Keep your head up. I mean, it would probably work for their generation to survive, right? But for us to be outspoken, we internalize that, trying to protect ourselves, which is good. They mean well for us, right? But then when it comes to the society of trying to speak up in a time when they need so much of us out there to change the status quo, we internalize what our parents are trying to do to protect ourselves, and we end up not saying anything and not doing as much, and we just hyper-normalize what is going on right now. And that's a bad habit. But there are also good habits. Good habits are things that carry us when our will falters. Good habits are things that when we are just tired and we don't want to do anything more about a certain situation, it compels us to keep going. And we can develop good habits, but we have to unlearn our bad habits. And to unlearn that, right, unfortunately requires crises. Unfortunately requires trauma for us to realize, oh my God, I need to change a few things. Now, whether it's a trauma of the past election, whether it's a trauma of having, your institutions vandalized, whether it's a trauma of black bodies and brown bodies being murdered indiscriminately. There's trauma of trans. There's 7 trans murders already in the year of 2016, to one of them being today, of requiring you to realize, I might be next. I don't want for you to feel like you have to put yourself in crisis to change a habit. And then it's probably too late. How do we get to a point where we change our habits, where we're in control, where we don't have to rely on crises? And then going back to what happened in high school, that's a story that I still go back to and try to bring up in my present day. What worked then? Well, how did that was a game changer for me. I flipped from shy to outspoken because of what happened in high school. Because I was in control. A movie screening is not being threatened. All right? A movie screening, I have that privilege. We all have our privilege right now as students in a safe environment. Listen to a speaker instead of worrying about being put at the table, worrying about being shot, being pulled over. This is a relative privilege. Where can we use our privilege to be in control of the situation, to change our habits, to unlearn our bad ones, and develop good ones? And that's all about getting outside of your bubble. The bubble being socialization, right? Society has socialized all of us to behave a certain way based on our identities, right? How do you imagine what your habits are when you grow up black, trans, Latino, a woman, right? Growing up in social society, compelling you to act a certain way. How do you get out of that? Because it is a bubble. And how do we get out of the bubble while retaining control? So in my experience, in my privilege, I would say as a cisgendered, heteronormative man, I had privilege, so much space to unlearn my habits of just going with the flow, right? Always constantly challenge myself. Because even as a man, we have toxic masculinity, and I have been socialized to not reflect and talk about my problems and being honest with my identity and being self-reflective. So I had to unlearn that. And in that space, I was able to have an honest conversation of what I want to do with my life. So about the middle of my college, which is another story, where my middle of college, I was hiding everything from my parents, right? My parents finally couldn't follow me anymore. I was in college, and I did everything but being a doctor. I did all the classes, so on paper it showed that I was doing what they wanted. But on the side, I was bartending, I was DJing, I was dancing, I was doing everything that would make my dad super pissed. And in the middle of college, my dad died from a heart attack, like suddenly. And my mom got Parkinson's. And it was a very sad time in my life. And it was also a time where we had no money, because my dad was the only breadwinner, and once he was gone, there was no way I was able to pay for my tuition. I mean, that was another shit show. That was another story in itself. But either way, I managed to get back in college and find a way to stay in school. By that time, I was free. My parents were no longer in control. And I ended up in that space, in that time of crisis. I undid everything. I tried to become my own person again. And when I was a really good student, I started failing everything. I literally see my GPAs like this, and then my dad like it was just bad. And I almost failed out.